We wanted to talk about what happens when we die. Ted, are you there?
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. So tell me more about this topic that you want to talk about.
Well, what I want to talk about is known as generic subjective continuity, and it is kind of a alternative to the idea of there being oblivion or blackness after we cease to exist.
Okay.
I'm an atheist, and I do not believe in heaven or any supernatural supernatural stuff after we die. So I agree that we cease to exist when we die, but I don't think that just because our experience is over that is the end of experience. You know, we talked about this before, actually, during the pilot of your show.
Yes,
a while ago.
I do remember this conversation, and that's why your voice sounded familiar. Yes.
Yeah, so you remember my brother died, and it sent me into this kind of like obsession with death, and so I developed this theory on my own that because there are still organisms being born after I cease to exist, that there will be basically kind of like what I refer to as a camera switch from my perspective to the new perspective of a newly, whichever organism happens to be born immediately after I die.
Yes, I want to know, Reed, did you happen to catch this conversation? Do you know anything about what we were talking about here?
I'm sure I did. I don't remember it, though.
Yeah, so if I could summarize what you're saying right now so that I understand what you're saying, it's not exactly reincarnation necessarily, but it is kind of a switch of viewpoints after death in an already existing organism, right? Not like just being born.
No, it would have to be an organism that is newly conceived immediately after I die.
So it is birth then. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that my death is required for that organism to have an experience, because whether or not I lived or not, that organism still would be born and it would still have its experience with or without me. But my point is that because experience kind of takes precedence over nothingness. Does that make sense to you?
Possibly. I want Reed to kind of start tackling this one. Give him some airtime today.
Okay.
Sure.
Yes.
So in street epistemology, we usually ask up front what people's confidence is about whatever they believe. Like, say, on a scale from 0 to 100, where 100 is absolute confidence, no more questions, like could not be mistaken about it. 0, all questions, all doubt. Where would you find yourself on this?
I'm very confident with it. So
very confident. Gotcha.
Yeah, I actually pretty much completely accept it as truth, except for, well, I'd say maybe 99%, because I do realize that my mouth is getting dry, but I do realize that there actually is a possibility that maybe Christians are right, and maybe we do have souls, and maybe we do go to heaven. But I just highly doubt that.
So that's another option, is the Christianity afterlife. Are there any other possibilities in your mind about afterlives, or no afterlives at all?
I used to accept the idea that most, excuse me, I got to take a drink. That most atheists share is the idea of there being like nothingness afterwards. But I realized that doesn't make much sense, because, well, unless you really understand what nothingness is, and nothingness just means that I cease to exist. But if I cease to exist and in a cosmos that is still having experiencers born into it, then just like my experience took precedence since the day I was born, wouldn't something else then take precedence as soon as it's born?
Possibly. I would just wonder how that
think
continuity would work, or
I think it's just because the only thing that exists is the cosmos, and so there's either experience or there is, and there is. If there is no experience, then it is not an experience, but there is only experience. And
yeah.
do you understand?
Was there ever a time before anything was alive in your mind?
Yeah, but for that living thing, it wouldn't be able to recall not being alive. Just like my personal feeling is that everything I remember is only within the context of my own life. So it feels to me that I have always been, you know what I mean? It's almost as if I've always existed, but I haven't.
It feels like that for you.
You're right. Yes, there would definitely have to be a first living organism, and so yeah, there was nothing, but it wasn't a fact for anyone. Just as Epicurus pointed out, when death is, I am not, and so it would just it's not a fact for me. So, but what is a fact is experience or consciousness. It is always a fact. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Cool. So what would you say is the main reason why you believe this to be the case, that we'd survive after our deaths?
Well, after my brother died, before he died, I believed in God, and I prayed that he, save him, but he didn't. And so I realized, this is a whole lot of horse shit, and I have to stop believing this. And so then I really went back. I used to be an atheist years before that. And so I went back to my atheism, and I was like, okay, I am going to figure out what the heck happens after we die. And it occurred to me, it just like came to me out of thin air that, oh my God, after my experience is over, there's just going to be a continuity of experience via some new organism. And it is not reincarnation, because it would be basically like as if I went to sleep one night and then I woke up the next morning and I had no memories whatsoever of anything. And I woke up and I didn't even know to question what is life. I didn't even know what a question was. You know what I mean? Like being a fetus in a womb, basically. But so that all occurred to me. And then I was just like, so I for about a few months, I was talking to people about this and stuff, and then I came across this guy named Tom W. Clark, who runs a website called naturalism.org, and I read his essay called Death, Nothingness, and Subjectivity, and I was like, oh my God, we came to the same conclusion independently, and he actually had things on his website where other people came to the same exact conclusion as him independently. So I personally feel like this is like kind of like the moment that Darwin realized about evolution being true, and everybody else was like, "Oh, that's woo, that's that's word salad and all that." But and that's what everybody's saying in the comment section right now.
You're saying it came to you, or it occurred to you, and this is the reason why you believe it to be the case?
Well, I researched it a lot too, and then it was really reified for me whenever I saw that other atheists were also independently coming to this conclusion. And logically, it's the only conclusion that I can make if I cease to exist. I feel like if I cease to exist, in the same way that my existence disallows for nothingness to be what is, then in that same way, that has to happen again, only it won't be me, and I won't have any previous memories, just like being born again.
I'm kind of confused why you're saying it has to happen again.
Well, I suppose you're right. It doesn't have to happen again, because there could be a period in time where there will be the very last thing that ever lives. And whenever that thing dies, after that, then unless the cosmos starts all over and evolution starts over again, and then life starts over again, and then maybe it starts. See, I just keep coming back to the idea of like the universe being infinite.
Well, I think Reed has a question for you.
Is this is this belief testable at all? Is there any way to tell if we're mistaken about this?
That's a very good point. I do not think that's another reason I tell people, I'm saying, this is a big if, you know, I mean, it's quite possible we have souls, and it's quite possible that, well, maybe after I die, I just have a frozen screen of my last thing I ever saw, and it's just frozen screen for the rest of my life, and for the rest of eternity. And I don't really understand how that would work, because I would decompose, my brain would decompose, and so that doesn't make sense to me either. But no, it's not testable.
It's not testable.
But
so you're currently 99% confident.
What's that?
So it's not testable.
Confident.
Mm-hmm. So does that mean you could not? Are you stuck at 99% for the rest of your life?
I don't know. I don't think it's a bad place to be stuck. I feel like I'm just as satisfied with this worldview as I am with a worldview of determinism. And like, I'm a determinist, and I'm just as satisfied with that. And I, you know, it's almost as difficult it's probably more difficult to prove than free will. Determinism.
If this wasn't true, would you want to know that?
Yes. That's what I want. That's what I want. I want somebody to disprove it.
If it's not testable at all, how could that happen?
Yes, good point. Very good point. I like that. I just feel like it's, personally, I just keep surmising in my head, and I keep coming to this conclusion. I'm like, okay, so like at the time of the dinosaurs, none of us existed, right? So, but the dinosaurs did exist. They were what did exist. So in the very same way that I'm having this visceral experience of experience right now, my consciousness, that was the fact back then for the dinosaurs. Only each, as individuals, they experienced it individually. But in the same way I'm looking out of my eyes right now, there was a dinosaur at that period in time that was looking out of its eyes the very same way that I am right now, this visceral experience of life.
What I'm hearing you say is you could be a reincarnated dinosaur?
No. That's not what I'm saying.
I
think he's making a comparison of experiences. It's kind of a fact.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if whatever consciousness was in that dinosaur it just keeps going and do organisms over time, why couldn't that be the case?
No.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
No. I don't believe in souls, and I do not believe in dualism in that context.
But you do. It's more like a continuous experience. It just kind of keeps going. Is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
There is a consciousness that is kind of seeing and experiencing things, and it goes through different incarnations, sort of, over time. Is that kind of Well, different physical bodies, but
what you're describing is kind of reincarnation.
Well,
what I'm describing is the fact that the cosmos continues to have experiencers born into it. Alan Watts actually made a really good talk about this. He called the talk, he said, "Everybody is I." He said, everybody has the experience of being I, you know. From our point of view, we are all the one. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I've heard a lot about from Alan Watts and stuff. I think he's really interesting, and he gives a lot of really descriptive ideas, but I think Reed kind of touched on a critical point that I'd like to go back on. It's this idea of, well, if we can't test this belief, if we have no idea of kind of examining it through any kind of measure, how can we have any confidence in the belief being true?
Well, I feel like it's only surmisable. It's only like it's purely logical. But yeah, totally. There could I have been lately.
So I'll give you an example.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I tell myself that all the time. I'm like, there could be something that I am not considering at all, and I could be wrong.
I want to give you an example that you actually brought up earlier, which is really brilliant. You talked about Darwin's theory of evolution. And you're right in that when Darwin first proposed this kind of idea of, of different animals coming from a kind of almost a single lineage, if you go back far enough, that might sound a bit odd. That might sound kind of crazy. But I think what's interesting about Darwin is that even now we can look at and examine speciation occurring through a mechanism. Like we can actually look at DNA changing. We can actually see the processes that are making this belief like why we believe it to be true. We can actually examine it and kind of test it and compare it to other ideas like intelligent design and things like that, which might give an alternative explanation to the idea of where did all these beings come from.
Right. But I mean, in a world that never had religion, we would still discover that evolution was true.
I agree.
I mean, I personally, I have this belief that people a long time ago, probably during the time when there was all these different humanoids walking on the planet, I have a sneaking suspicion that they probably had some view of evolution. Hey, look at us. We look just like freaking apes. We had to come from them. You know what I mean?
I know of some cultures that have talked about the bonobos being kind of brothers to humanity in my anthropology classes. But yeah, I think there's reason to believe why people could come to those conclusions. But if we're examining the truth behind those conclusions, as in the methodology behind how we can know those conclusions to be true, they may not have had access to the data that we have now. The evidence that we have now to kind of confirm or at least give a higher confidence to what's being true. But I'm having trouble understanding how in your worldview we can even begin to collect any kind of data to know that this is the case. And if we could or couldn't, like let's say that we could have a method and, well, I'm not going to go that way actually. I'm going to ask, do you think that it's a good idea to have confidence in an idea that we can't actually test, at least as high of a confidence that you have in an idea that's ultimately untestable?
Well, I don't think this particular idea, it does do some, it is traumatic emotionally to accept it first, that like, oh, I could, the next experience could be that of a maggot or a mayfly. You know what I mean? But beyond that, it does give very good reason for like the golden rule to treat other people with kindness. But yeah, I get your point. But I just feel like if it's a big if we cease to exist when we die, then to me this is the logical conclusion that I end, but something else begins. And because there is only the cosmos, then this is the only place that things happen. And so
if you
what happens is what happens.
If you came to that conclusion that we no longer exist after we die, there's nothing there, how do you think you would live your life differently?
Well, the same, really, except for, that's pretty depressing, the idea that there would just be, what would ceasing to exist be if there was nothing to later interrupt that nothingness? You know what I mean?
I'm not sure, actually.
Like it would be
if there
similar
is
to
just
20 years before you were
just
born.
an eternity. Well, actually, that's a very good point. Yeah, because it wouldn't be a fact for me. So, but either way, it's pretty much. It's almost like Alan Watts said. It's like saying the same thing. He actually did make that point. But so technically, I believe to answer your question, I think I would not much would change really, and since I have adopted this theory, not much has changed, honestly, for me. So that's I really appreciate you asking me that question, because I didn't really even consider that not much has changed for me as far as the way I conduct my life.
Do you think you mentioned this idea that it's almost incomprehensible to understand what the ceasing of consciousness would be like, and
yeah,
does that affect your confidence at all? Like, do you think that if we could understand what that even meant, that would change your confidence in this belief being true?
Yeah. I mean, because I can't be 100% sure, I definitely do sometimes sit around and ponder what other possibilities there could be. And so that's always a fun thought exercise.
Yeah, I mean, because I could, the reason why I ask this is because I can definitely come up with examples in my mind of some more comprehensible ideas of after we die. Like I could say, oh, my experience just zaps me up to heaven. And like, that makes sense, right? Because I'm still kind of alive and I kind of maybe would know what that feels like. But the kind of comprehensibility of it doesn't seem to necessarily reflect the truth of it.
Definitely.
If it's true that our experiences kind of stop happening after we pass away, I wouldn't be able to tell what that is like regardless, because I have no experiences of that, right? So it almost, it doesn't seem like
Epicurus said.
Yeah. So my confidence in the belief doesn't seem to would change at all if.
So I come back to the same kind of nihilistic worldview that I've had my entire life, honestly. And I love the lyrics. Freddie Mercury wrote "Nothing Really Matters," and that kind of nihilist is, to me, it's freeing. To me, it's liberating, because it's like, phew, I'm glad nothing really matters, because if things really mattered, that kind of implies that there's a God, and he gave us meaning and all this and that, and it's just like, that's too much stress for me. I can't live in that world.
Do we need to be able to live forever for things to matter in this life?
No. See, the idea is that I don't believe that I live forever. In my theory, the theory that I told you about is called generic subjective continuity, and I believe that I cease to exist. So it will be the other end of me, and so I won't be around to appreciate whatever is next. But whatever is next, it'll be like I said, the same state of mind that I had whenever. It won't be me though, but that future organism will have the state of mind of a freshly conceived whatever it is, a freshly conceived human or a freshly conceived baby horse or whatever it might be. But it will have no memories whatsoever. So it will be a complete deleting of my life.
Okay, that sounds pretty close to just dying in general.
Yeah. But there isn't nothingness after that. Instead, there is something else, some other perspective subsumes or takes over or follows.
Mm-hmm. But if the part that makes you kind of dies, like isn't there anymore, doesn't that just mean that you have died? Like, what is the relationship between this new thing that has experiences and the old thing?
What's that last part? I'm sorry.
What is the relationship between the thing that's dying and the new thing that's having experiences? How are they connected in any way?
There's no connection.
Okay. Maybe I'm a bit confused. If one thing is having a separate experience and then dying, and then another being is having a separate experience, I mean,
living. Yeah, it's just, I think it's a more, to me, it describes what happens after death rather than just saying, well, there's nothing after. We kind of bookshelf our lives in this, like, okay, there was nothing before my birth and there's nothing after my death. But in reality, there is never nothing in the cosmos. There is, before my birth, there was lots of life, and after my death, there will be lots of life. You know what I mean? And we kind of like bookshelf ourselves into this egotistical little blip, and we think that's it, and really it's not it. And the thing is, an important point that I need to make is that future organism will be the self, that will be the one experiencing. And so it will be the new I, it will be the new first person experience. And so it will be like similar to like hitting a reset button. It's like a complete renewal of an appreciation for the cosmos.
Okay. So at some point there was nothing alive, and currently there are now billions, trillions of living things, at least on Earth. Where do these new living, whatever is in their consciousness, come from?
Anything that is newly conceived in the cosmos, like say maybe it's a mosquito, or maybe it's a maggot, or maybe it's a horse, or maybe it's an elephant. Anything that is newly conceived, as long as it will only be one individual organism, because just as I experienced myself as an individual, it too will only experience itself as an individual. And so the Earth is constantly, like you said, is constantly having trillions of things born on it. So there's no shortage of supply of experiencers.
Yeah, what gives these new living things consciousness?
That's the question, isn't it?
Is everything alive conscious?
No. Only what I say is, instead of the word consciousness, I like to use the word experience or experiencers, because I don't really think that maybe a microorganism might have an experience, but I don't know if it counts as consciousness. You know what I mean? Like an ant definitely has an experience of being an ant, but does it have an ego? I don't know about that. So
is it possible for a human to lose this experience state and still be alive?
Sorry, is it? Yeah, with like anesthesia or being knocked out and things like that. It happens to us all the time. But anesthesia is very different from death, because
is that a discontinuity in this experience? Anesthesia?
Pardon me?
Is that a discontinuity in this experience?
Yeah.
So it's possible to not be entirely continuous with this experience.
Well, for me, that lack of experience, if say somebody knocks me out, I won't experience that 45 minutes where I'm out cold. You know what I mean? So for me, from my perspective, that period of time where I'm knocked out is skipped over.
And
right?
Why couldn't that experience just be knocked out indefinitely when we die?
because when I die, my brain dissolves. And so with anesthesia, my brain is still there waiting for me to wake up. But when I die, my brain is no longer there waiting for me to wake up. And I have nothing there as a placeholder.
Yeah. Okay. I have no idea where to go with this.
Yeah, this is interesting, Ted. I'm sure some people in the comment sections have already been engaging with you on this. I think we're probably going to have to go now for time. This is a really great conversation, by the way. But I would be curious to know, maybe in a future conversation if you want to call back, or if you want to go on like the ACA Discords or some of the ACA Facebook pages to engage with other people, is this idea that we were talking about kind of earlier on the mechanisms behind this belief. Like, I agree with you. There's a logic going on to your belief. Whether or not it's actually happening, though, those are kind of two different things. I can imagine a lot, like Christianity, for example, and going back to that, has a logic to it in a way. Like, it has an internal system where things kind of work. Even if it doesn't completely make sense, there's something to that. But just because something is consistent within its own logical framework doesn't necessarily mean that that framework exists in reality.
Totally.
And that's what I would challenge you to come to us, to convince us of your belief. I think we'd have to know the mechanisms. I think Reed would agree with me on this, in that we need to know how we know for sure that this is happening and not something else, that it's not just an end of our entire experiences, that we're not actually all going to heaven, that we're not actually going to be waking up in a lab somewhere by scientists. You know, like, there's other things that could be going on, but until we have a mechanism to know for sure, until we have any evidence to any of these other phenomenon, I think Reed and I would have to choose to withhold our belief.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So.
Hello? Okay. Hey, I wanted to let you know that music that you guys were listening to before the show came on, that really cool techno.
Yeah.
That was a band called Juno Reactor.
Yeah.
I love those guys, but I just want to let you know that. But anyways, the reason I called in was I did want to try to convince you guys of my view, but I also did want to be challenged.
Yes,
and so you guys did that, and so I really appreciated this conversation as well.
I appreciated this conversation too, Ted. I think Reed and I can both agree this was really interesting. This is definitely not the typical kinds of beliefs that we get to talk about on here. So, I say call again if you have something to bring to us. This is what we've laid out to you. This is what we want to know. And if not, maybe consider changing your own beliefs. I don't know. Maybe that's the option. Right? Sometimes
all right, I'll keep working on it.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for calling, Ted. This was fun. We'll see you next time.
All right, bye.
Thanks, Ted.
Fun stuff. Yeah, I remember when we had this conversation in, I think it was our pilot episode or one of the pilot episodes about this idea. And when I was first starting out trying this call-in show thing, I was like, oh man, this is way different than the typical stuff you kind of hear. What did you think about that conversation, Reed?
Yeah. For sure. I mean, we were talking earlier to the other caller about, how her aunt or something was had issues with a belief related to death, and I think this is very similar. A huge portion of what drives our beliefs and actions is a sense of trying to deny death. Like, we try to do things to leave a lasting legacy in our lives. It's another part of it. Like doing this show, is a part of it a little bit. This might exist far after we're gone. So this is in a sense a way to survive our own deaths a little bit. It's a powerful psychological factor, and if we're not careful, that can lead us to believing in things that may not be evidence-based, but it's good to talk about these things.
Absolutely. Death and psychology seem to go hand in hand. And for some reason, we talk about death a lot on this show. I don't know why. It just kind of happens. I think it's just important to the human psyche. It's something that's kind of always on the back of people's minds, and I'm perfectly fine talking about whatever people want to talk to me about. But you know, I do wonder why we talk about it here so much. I really don't have an explanation. It just kind of happens.